Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've done my top 10 best games of 2025, and now it's time for my worst. Much like my first video, these games don't necessarily have to be games that came out in 2025, they just have to be games I've played in 2025. Also, like my last video, there will be no repeats of games within the same series. However, there is one exception which I will talk about more in depth when I actually get to it. Other than that, it's a top 10 list, or in this case, top 7. So I'm just going to assume you know how the video is going to work. Starting off at number 7, I have Dark Souls 2. Whilst I definitely don't hate Dark Souls 2 and do think there is some actual fun to be had with this one, it's pretty hard to deny that this really isn't a great game. Whilst some areas and bosses can be fun to play around in, more often than not the level design and enemy placement really aren't the best, especially considering how good a lot of Dark Souls 1's areas were. On top of that, there are some core gameplay mechanics in this game that make the game feel super clunky. For example, the ADP skill affects your dodge iframes, and when using great swords or other large weapons, it can be very easy to accidentally divert your swing away from an enemy, even if you're locked on. Because of this, whenever I replay Dark Souls 2, I only really stick to one build, that being a rapier build, because it eliminates some of the clunkiness that the other weapons have. Overall, I do actually kind of like this game, but on my first ever playthrough, it was an absolutely miserable experience, and it's only slightly better to get through on replays, and it's also the only FromSoft Souls game I actually look at guides for. The quality overall is just not better than Dark Souls 1 or even the original Demon Souls, and is definitely the black sheep of From Software's Souls-likes. It's also the game from FromSoft I've replayed the least out of their Souls-like games. At number 6, I put Crash Bandicoot 4. Crash 4 isn't really a bad game by the standard definition, but it definitely is more of a disappointment. Crash 4 was made by a different team than the ones who made the original trilogy, and you can just tell that it's very different. The levels don't feel as fun and interesting to play, the story has a lot more of a presence in the game than the others, sometimes taking away from the gameplay, and the new additions to the gameplay, such as being able to play as different characters for some levels, just feels awkward. During my playthrough, I also encountered a bug which crashed my game and corrupted my save file, which made me lose like 4 hours of progress. And considering by that point in the game I was already severely disappointed in it, I never tried to power through and get back to where I was. Moving on to the games that I can 100% say are bad all around, EnemyFront takes the number 5 spot. Oh my god, so many bad things I could say about this game. This game is just so boring and buggy. I'm shocked I managed to make it the whole way through the game. This game tries to be a Call of Duty campaign, but like one of the bad CODs, not any of the good ones. The story of this game follows the main character who's a war reporter and is such an insufferable douchebag. He basically follows the French resistance movement in World War II and talks the whole time about not understanding why the French are resisting the Germans, even after actively seeing the Germans commit major war crimes on the French right in front of him. Even after seeing this, he has no sympathy for the French people and only really cares about furthering his own career. Like the bad main character and bad story, the gameplay is just as awful. EnemyFront tries to be Call of Duty so hard, but very obviously doesn't have the polish to achieve this. To start off with, EnemyFront fails to have the main thing FPS games are about feel good. The guns. The snipers in this game are my favourite to make fun of, as the scope for both of the snipers this game has to offer just doesn't line up at all with where the bullet is going. Like, I understand maybe fucking it up once, but how do you manage to do it twice and ship the game without noticing? The game also has a very half-baked stealth system which behaves similar to the generic Ubisoft Far Cry one, but may as well not even exist, as AI are so dumb you can literally just sprint past them to the end of the level. Another awesome thing this game has is its render distance being so low that if enemies are too far away from you, they won't be loaded in on your screen but will still be able to shoot you, leading to a lot of cheap deaths. Enemy snipers can also aimbot headshot you through walls sometimes. Other than these cool little things, there's overused slow-mo, heavily reused animations for cinematics, friendly AI that is useless, and comically weak enemy tanks. Anyway, moving on to another brilliant waste of my time I played this year that was also set in World War II. At number 4, I put The History Channel's A Battle for the Pacific. This game was made by a very infamous developer called Cauldron. These guys are very well known for making pretty bad games, and this game is no exception. I actually found out after I made my video on it that Cauldron made a bunch of games for the History Channel, so maybe I'll cover more of these games sometime in the future. Anyway, Cauldron's main claim to fame is making a sequel to the well-regarded Soldier of Fortune franchise that was so bad it killed the entire series. The story here is just one big nothing burger. It feels like the History Channel wanted this to be an interactable documentary because in cutscenes you follow the story of an actual real-life American World War II general. But when it comes to the in-game story, it really feels like none of this matters and it is very disjointed from the cutscenes. The gameplay somehow managed to be more terrible than the story though. First off, before I even actually got into the game, I changed my resolution to one that actually suited my monitor, and that somehow caused my PC to sound like it was about to fucking explode. On top of that, this game has some of the worst mouse acceleration I've ever seen in a game, and this weird ADS which doesn't even make your gun more accurate, it's just a slight zoom. Both of these features make it really hard to aim. This is mostly mitigated, however, by how bad the enemy AI is. A lot of the time they will just stand right out in the open or run straight at you. The friendly AI isn't any better. Most missions' objectives just have you follow your commander, and most of the time he will just randomly get stuck and soft lock you. The game also requires you to essentially have your cock up his ass as well, as it will straight up fail the mission if you're more than 20 meters away from him. He runs like an Olympic sprinter, by the way, and this game does not have a sprint feature, so expect this to be your main reason for failing missions if you ever play this. Friendlies will also repeat the same 3 voice lines 100 times in a mission, which just compounds on all the other annoying shit in this game. Speaking of annoying audio, this game's soundtrack consists of the same 30-second drum loop repeated over and over and over again throughout the entire game. And to finally top it all off, the game reuses the same trench level like 5 times, and there's only about 10 missions in this game, so yeah, very annoying and frustrating game. It doesn't even have the pleasure of being funny bad like EnemyFront, it's just bad. Getting down to the last 3 spots, these are games that I just absolutely despise. Anyway, for number 3 I put The Division games. The reason why I broke my rule and put both these games in the same spot is because my opinions on both games are largely similar. Starting off with the first game, story-wise, it's absolutely atrocious. The plot starts off with us learning about how a bunch of terrorists use a virus to poison money on Black Friday, and this virus was so powerful that it essentially destroyed all of America. First off, I think that this being the catalyst for the plot is just stupid. I really feel like some Ubisoft writers thought this would be a good metaphor about how bad capitalism is, but it's so on the nose that it just feels absurd. You also never see these terrorists in game. You spend the whole game fighting a bunch of gangs, with none of these gangs really acting as a main bad guy, which I think makes the story feel even more disjointed. The gameplay for The Division 1 also just feels very generic. It's a third-person cover-based shooter with some MMORPG mechanics, which on paper does sound cool, but it never really excels at any of these core features, leading to quite a bland and boring experience. Now before moving on to The Division 2, I do want to point out that I did get a fair few comments saying that this game was better than the first, and the game is better when playing with a friend. So I took that advice into account and recruited my mate Alex to play with me. Now, whilst I will say The Division 2 is slightly better than The Division 1, it is not enough for me to actually enjoy the game. All of my complaints from the first game apply to the second game. It doesn't really excel at anything, and overall it's just a very boring experience. And Alex agreed with me because we both just weren't having any fun and decided not to continue playing the game after only 8 hours of playtime. On top of just the general boredom, there were the constant crashes I was experiencing with this game and the very annoying tutorial spam. The Division 2 is one of those games that genuinely thinks you're retarded and gives you a tutorial every 5 seconds, and sometimes it gives tutorials for stuff I already figured out on my own, and even doubles up the tutorials and gives you tutorials you've already seen. These are the annoying kind of tutorials too that just cover your whole screen and stop you from doing anything. Upon asking Alex his thoughts on the game for the video, he said, and I quote, "It looks like a Key and Peele skit." If you'd also notice, I haven't made a separate video for The Division 2 because I was so bored while playing it, I knew I was going to be bored making a video on it, and if I'm bored making a video on it, I know it's not going to be a good enough quality video to post. Anyway, I made these two share a spot because they both deserve to be here and I really couldn't decide between them. Moving on to my number 2 spot now, I've put Lords of the Fallen 2014. This game is just terrible, there's no two ways around it. Not only is it terrible, but it's a terrible Souls-like. I feel like Souls-likes are a genre of game where almost everything has to feel good, otherwise the game just feels bad to play. And in Lords of the Fallen, they managed to make everything feel bad. You see, with a game like Dark Souls 2 where basic stuff like rolling and attacking with some weapons feels bad, at least there's ways to get around it even if you're forced to play in a certain playstyle you don't particularly enjoy. With Lords of the Fallen though, there is no workaround for these issues. Speaking of which, what are the issues with this game? Well, the game is just super sluggish. Like, it seriously takes a full 5 to 10 seconds to do anything in this game. Running is slow, dodging is slow, attacking is slow, and pretty much anything your character does is slow and sluggish. This would be fine if the game was well balanced around this speed, but it really isn't, especially in boss fights. The bosses in this game are definitely the worst part, mainly because they don't really leave big enough openings for you to deal damage to them. Usually in Souls games, bosses will do a few attacks, and after they finish their attacks, there's a bit of a window where they are recovering and the player can get a few hits in. And usually this is fine, as with some well-timed dodges you are able to stay close to the boss to lessen the time you have to run to the boss before you can actually hit them. Even in a slower Souls like Dark Souls 2, this is quite possible. However, Lords of the Fallen's dodging is so slow and clunky and even slightly delayed from when you actually press the button that this is nearly impossible. So what ends up happening in every boss fight is you sit as far away from the boss as possible, just waiting for an opening. Then when that opening comes, you have to very slowly and sluggishly run to the boss and then begin your slow and sluggish attack animation. And if you're lucky, you may just be able to get a single hit in without trading damage from the boss's follow-up attack that he's immediately started winding up after his very small window of recovery. But this is probably a 1 in 100 chance. Holy fuck, this game is so bad, it's killing me. But this is probably a 1 in 100 chance. What ends up happening most of the time is you just trade hits with the boss and hope you have enough health and heals to outdamage them. But even then, like I mentioned earlier, healing is also very slow, sluggish and clunky, so you'll just probably die trying to heal anyway. And if you thought this shit sandwich wasn't stinky enough, the golden shower drizzled over it is the absolutely disgusting levels of screen shake. Seriously, whenever you do anything in this game, the screen shakes like there's a fucking earthquake going on. Not only does this make it really hard to see some enemy attacks, but it is genuinely vomit-inducing to look at for long periods of time. Especially if you backstab an enemy, like look at this mess. I'm not really one to get motion sick when gaming, but this game almost did it for me. An absolutely horrible experience all around. Now to my number 1 spot. Not only do I think this is the worst game I've played this year, but this takes the cake for my most hated game of all time. At number 1, I put TheDustborn. This game is on a whole other level of bad. It's the type of game where if you were to make a tier list, you'd put it in its own dedicated category because it is worse than a bad game. Fuck me, where do I even begin with this one? I guess let's start with how this game was made. To start off with, this game was made by a Norwegian dev team and began its life as a response to Donald Trump winning his first presidency. After the game began development, it eventually received some attention from the Norwegian government, specifically the far left political party over there. This political party would give the dev team money to help fund the game and also to push their political ideals into the story. Look, the last thing I want to do on this channel is make my analysis on games political by any means, but I think with this game it's fair to say it's woke. It has all the hallmarks of having so much diversity in the game that it's ridiculous, and really feels like the characters are only diverse just so they can get diversity brownie points. The fact that almost every line in this game really feels like it's pushing some sort of political agenda, and that this game was literally funded by a government political party that has these ideals, I think it is fair in this case to at least mention this stuff. There is definitely a way to do politics in media, whether it's movies or games, but you have to do it with nuance and respect. I think BioShock is a fair example, as that game was also made as a political response, but to a book instead of the Orange Man winning his presidency. BioShock is far better at getting its message across because it has nuance, respect, and patience, and uses clever world building and story techniques to slowly show the player its message and the meaning behind it. Whereas TheDustborn just shoots word diarrhea into your ears and expects you to respect it. Another thing that helped BioShock 2 was that it was just actually a good game. You know, I may forgive Dustborn's terrible pandering story if the gameplay was good, but it's just not. It tries to have some sort of Batman Arkham style combat, but it also has a Souls-like lock-on system which is practically useless. The combat is also very janky, with it feeling like sometimes your hits aren't connecting, and the ones that do feel very sticky, making that free-flow Arkham style combat seem like it was going for completely useless. A third part of the combat is the powers you can use, and I'm not really sure how these powers work story-wise, as the game just does a terrible job at explaining it. Anyway, other than being very janky like the rest of the gameplay, basically what happens is your character says a phrase and that phrase will cause the power to manifest. For example, there's a power called bully and your character says what I guess is supposed to be a mean phrase to bully this person and weaken their defenses. But the phrases they say are so comically awful, but the game treats it so seriously. Your character literally says stuff like, "I don't like your attitude!" And this is apparently a very mean phrase in this universe. And look, I think I've talked about this game long enough, so I'm just going to stop myself here, otherwise this section of the video is going to end up being half the video itself. Anyway, that's the end of the video. I know I was waffling on a bit with some of these games, especially that cancerous tumour called TheDustborn, but I do have a genuine hatred for how bad some of these games are. I do also have separate dedicated videos for all of these games, except for TheDivision 2 like I mentioned earlier, but other than that, if you want a bit of a more in-depth analysis on one of these games, you can find it on my channel. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.